Okay, I was actually going to talk about this in the Xenoblade video, but I really do think this needs its own video because this is kind of a weird Nintendo phenomenon that I've noticed that I wanted to bring up. I talked about this on stream, I think, and it's just one of those fringe like autistic things that like nobody would care about. So I really do need to make a video talking about this. Like this is essential. This is the most important thing you will see about this year. People are refunding Xenoblade Chronicles X, Nintendo Switch 2 edition, just so they can refund it. Just so they can post about it on social media and make some giant conspiracy about how Nintendo is issuing refunds when they normally don't. Like this is the funny thing about this, because this is the links that people will go to try and downplay Xenoblade Chronicles X, where people will buy a $5 game, say it's like causing them all these problems, and they go to Nintendo support and ask for a refund, okay? And they'll get it. And like the thing about this is the narrative among like the general Nintendo community is this idea that Nintendo never issues refunds. That if they're issuing refunds, that means they know that there's something wrong with the game and that they know they have to like make it up to the customers. Otherwise, they're going to get fucked somehow. In actuality, they do issue refunds. You can reach out to customer support. You do have to talk about talk about it with them, and they'll issue it to you, and they will like pull it back, and like you'll go back to the regular Xenoblade Chronicles X Nintendo Switch edition. So again, this entire situation is like a complete nothing burger, right? You asked the company for a refund and you got it. The problem is like the way it's being framed and the way people are talking about it. Because if you look on like social media, what you see is that like people who are just like, oh yeah, I'm a huge fan of Xenoblade Chronicles X, and then I bought the Switch 2 edition, and then I was so disappointed with it that I went out and I had it refunded. And then like they're posting about this on Reddit, they have screenshots with emails from Nintendo, they're like talking about it on Twitter, and I'm just like, this entire situation is just clickbait. Like, it feels very forced. It doesn't feel like anything that would actually happen. It reminds me a lot of, like, early on in the Switch 2 lifespan, where, like, the console was selling well, and, like, people like Review Tech USA were coming out and trying to tell you that, like, well, what's actually happening is that people are buying the technology, and then they're returning it immediately. So the numbers are up, even though that nobody is actually owns the console. It's retarded. You know, it is a giant cope. You know, nothing about that makes any sense, okay? You got a refund. There's no conspiracy about it. What are you talking about? If they refuse to give you the refund, you would just complain about that instead. But, like, again, this is a really good example of, like, several things, exactly, of how people will fabricate narratives out of whole cloth. How Nintendo is doomed no matter what they do. You know, of how, like, people will go to insane lengths to downplay Nintendo's major RPG franchises. You know, people are adamant that Nintendo has somehow, like, screwed up and that they've done something and that they're falling off and that they're not doing well and that they're just a complete disaster of a company, and I just don't see it. Like, I don't see it at all. Like, again, it's very, very interesting to see, like, how this situation is framed and how people talk about it. Because, to me, it just feels as if the masses are very, 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 very desperate to downplay every new Nintendo Switch 2 game. You know, they're desperate to downplay everything that comes out. They'll go to any lengths to complain about this or that, or complain about, like, what Nintendo is doing or what they're saying or what's happening in the wider community, or, like, complaining about, like, anything that they're doing. Like, it's remarkable, really, like, the lengths they'll go. And I feel like that is the important thing we really need to acknowledge when it comes to Nintendo's current place in the console industry, and like, is that you have a lot of people who have entire careers revolving around downplaying the company. You know, people laugh at like Arlo or beat 'em ups or like Nintendine, but like the reality is there's an entire industry around like creating narratives about the company and like pretending they're in this constant state of failing, like more than like any company that's ever failed before. It's like, it's insane and deranged, but That's what we're seeing now. Like, you are seeing Nintendo produce 20-minute videos, probably longer than that actually, trying to tell people that, like, well, actually Xenoblade Chronicles X is a huge failure because of this, this, and this, and because they're issuing refunds. Like, the game doesn't even work. And, like, the reality of that is that that isn't true. That will never be true. Like, I get, like, the demonization of Nintendo Switch and two editions of games really needs to stop. Because, like, you keep seeing these guys come out and they're like, I don't want Nintendo Switch 2 editions. I want new games. And I'm just like, we're getting new games this week. What are you talking about? Like, I have Tales of Berseria and Resident Evil 9 preloaded on my Switch right now. You know, I have Fire Red preloaded on my Switch right now. You know, I'm getting Pokapia next week. Oh, but Pokapia doesn't count because that's not my kind of game. I'm just like, really? You're really going there? You're really trying to pull this nonsense? You're trying to do this thing? You're trying to complain about Nintendo? You're trying to downplay what they're doing? It's like, it's just not working. Like, we're getting, like, what, like 6 games in the next couple of weeks? Like, well, I'm getting 6 games. Actually, more than that, because I'm getting, like, 3 Resident Evils. Yeah, Resident Evil 7, 8, and 9. That's 3. Pokemon Fire Red, Tales of Berseria, Pokapia, the Fatal Frame 2 remake. Yeah, that's 7 in, like, the next couple of weeks, you know? Like, it's a really good season for games, you know? And yet you keep seeing people, like, do this thing that, like, nothing's coming out and that there's nothing to play. You know, I'm seeing Nintendo Land do this thing where, like, oh, yeah, Super Mario Bros. Wonder isn't a new game because it came out 3 years ago, even though that the new content is brand new. Like, it is completely different from the base game. Like, it's a giant cope, essentially, like, from what I'm seeing and, like, what's going on here. Like, it's just a giant cope to try and, like, make Nintendo look like they're perpetually failing. And it's something that, like, I really do think needs to be spelled out to people, is that, like, these guys are going to straight up make narratives out of whole cloth. You know, we saw a couple of years ago, like, how upset people got about free updates, even though that's pretty industry standard for most games. You know, we're seeing now that, like, people are spurging out about Mario sports games existing, and they're spurging out about Pokapia being a Pokemon game. You know, you're seeing people freak out about, like, this or that, and it really needs to be spelled out to people, is that, like, you need to calm down. You know, you really need to stop obsessing over, like, this fringe stuff, and you need to stop paying attention to people who spend their time complaining about Nintendo giving them a refund. Like, that's the reality of this, is that when you're making a conspiracy theory about getting a refund, you're in too deep and you need to get a life. That is the reality of the Pretendo community today.